Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Anti-Doping Podcast, brought to you by the Partnership for Clean Competition. I'm your host, Dr. Marie McNeely, and today we are joined by our guest, Nick Paterson. Listeners, Nick is Chief Executive of Drug Free Sport New Zealand, and he's also Governing Board Chair for the Institute of Anti-Doping Organizations, or iNADO. In this interview, he's going to talk more about Drug Free Sport New Zealand, including the organization's history, the resources and services they provide, and also their role in the global anti-doping community. So, Nick, we are so excited to have you here with us. How are you?
I am very well, Kia ora, and hello to everybody. It's a pleasure to be on here.
We're so glad to have you with us, and we're looking forward to learning more about you and more about Drug Free Sport New Zealand. So perhaps we'll start first with you. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and perhaps how you found your way to this position there at Drug Free Sport New Zealand?
Yeah, sure. Like many people, grew up playing a huge variety of sports with obvious aspirations to be a high-performance athlete, but never quite making it in any one of the numerous sports, sadly. But with that background, qualified as accountant senior out of university and launched into a career, not so much in normal accounting, but in forensic accounting and fraud investigation. Much of my professional career has been fraud and corruption investigation, both civil and criminal. At the same time, of course, playing more sport. And then 20 years into that, this opportunity came up at Drug Free Sport New Zealand. And it's a coming together of my personal passion and my professional background, because ultimately, the continuum within fraud is about education, prevention, deterrence, detection, investigation, prosecution. We all know it's no different in anti-doping. We focus more on anti-doping at the front end of that. We really want to educate athletes, prevent it happening and deter it happening. Whereas the fraud investigation, I did a huge amount of investigations really, but the parallels are really clear. And the one final thing I'd say on top of that, I grew up as a huge Tour de France fan. In particular, I was on Champs-Élysées for at least 3 occasions when Lance Armstrong came across the finishing line in first. And so I'm well aware and always have been of the anti-doping rather than doping history going right back to some early major events and then through the Tour de France. So this has been a long-standing interest of mine, and this role now is just a real chance to bring it all together.
Absolutely. I love hearing that you had this passion for sport that really got you moving in this direction towards anti-doping. And you mentioned Drug Free Sport New Zealand and how this opportunity came up there. This is an amazing organization. So can you tell us a little bit more about Drug Free Sport New Zealand and the mission, and what are the organization's main responsibilities in anti-doping?
Well, we're on paper a pretty normal national anti-doping organization. And I say we run that full remit of services from education through testing, TUEs, et cetera, investigations, results management. Like many of us, we grew out of our National Olympic Committee back in the day. Probably one of the earlier starters, not as early as some, but certainly we've had people in these roles since about 1987. And when I say people, it was a single individual. So Graham Steele was my predecessor. I think it was about 87, might have been 88. And he continued from then as part of the National Olympic Committee, as part of the fledgling anti-doping organization, as part of the New Zealand Sports Doping Agency, I think it was called, into Drug Free Sport New Zealand in 2006. And he was the one and only chief executive until he stood down and I took over in 2017. So I took on this organization, had this huge history with a single individual, and Graham is still out there and will probably listen to this podcast. He still has just an enormous quantity of knowledge and experience in anti-doping. So it was an absolute privilege actually to take over him. In terms of the organization, we have grown obviously across that time, but even in the last 6 or 7 years, we've grown 8 or 9 people. We now sit at 25 in total, almost exclusively based in Auckland, but we've got 2 roving teams further down country. So that's kind of the organization top to bottom. It's a fun organization, part of it. We pride ourselves very close to our sports, NOC and NPC, and close in terms of we just work in much collaboration. We're really beginning to see the benefits of taking that approach.
Absolutely. And you mentioned some of the ways the organization has grown all the way from one person to where you are today. What are some of the other changes that you've seen in the organization since it was established?
Key changes have probably happened in the more recent times. We fundamentally changed our operating model 5 years ago. If you look across anti-doping, ADOs, or certainly NADOs, typically have an education team, and they have a testing team, and then they have a medicine and science team maybe, and a support function, and an IT, etc. We looked at ours 4 or 5 years ago and said, look, our education team and our testing team, the education team are trying to organize education workshops for athletes, to organize online learning for athletes. In order to organize a workshop, they have to go to the NSO, understand when they're going to be in camp, perhaps understand when they're going to get athletes together, then try and arrange the logistics of having an educator turn up to the right place at the right time to provide the workshop, answer the athlete question, and then after the event, deal with it later question. That's the education. And we looked at our testing team. So what the testing team are, they're looking to work with our NSO to understand when their camps are, for instance, in order to get together with athletes so that they can test them. And then the logistics of having a testing DCOs, etc., on the right place at the right time to deal with the athlete at the time in the appropriate fashion. Which is, well, this doesn't make sense. Why don't we push our education and testing team together? We have a separate education creation team who are creating some outstanding, not quite biased way, but some outstanding collateral and information for our apps. And then we have a sport operations team. And the sport operations team are responsible for putting out the education workshop and testing. For me, it's a change from being focused on us to being focused on the athletes. It's a change in that rather than the services that we wish to provide, which is education and testing. It's the more just the athlete or the NSO, what they want to receive. The NSOs have a single point of contact here. Their point of contact here understands the sport, understands the pathway to high performance, understands when the athletes are coming together and when they're not. And from our end, we can really closely know or hope. It's not a guarantee. Our aim, as for all of us, is to educate our athletes before we test them. And now we're in a position to really tie that together. That's kind of the really big change that we've had in recent times. And as I said it before, the benefits of that, well, we think they're really coming to fruition because, as I say, we've got a great understanding of sports. Maybe historically, once upon a time, where we were just mainly testing saw us as a burden when they just wanted to train athletes to get to major events. But they're now seeing us as a support partner where we work together. We're protecting their athletes domestically and internationally, and we work together to make sure that continues.
Certainly. And I understand that the organization and the overall sports landscape in New Zealand is continuing to change and evolve. And we know that there's some upcoming changes you tipped us off to that are coming in 2024. So Nick, can you tell us more about the development of New Zealand's Integrity, Sport and Recreation Commission and how this kind of reorganization really has the potential to impact the sport integrity landscape?
Yeah, look, it's a really fascinating time for us. And so when I say we've reorganized and restructured our approach in the last 5 years, it's all about to change what's more. And July the 1st, probably next year, no later than July the 1st, Drugs-Free Sport New Zealand will cease to exist and all of its functions and people get rolled into an Integrity Sport Recreation Commission. The Commission's responsibilities is integrity end-to-end. So it covers 4 or 5 pillars, one being anti-doping, one being match fixing corruption, one being child safety, and the other being athlete well-being. Interestingly, the Commission is being set up now to cover both sport and active creations. That's a much wider remit that we've ever been involved in previously. But it's exciting because it means for the country as a whole, for sport as a whole, you've got one body who is working there to support the NSO athletes to make sure that competitors compete cleanly, whether it be from doping or whether it be from corruption. We know that the athletes are protected from abuse. And the result can only be good for everybody. The spectators can know it's a good, fair, safe place for people to compete. And sport can only be the winner as a result of that.
Absolutely. And it sounds like from our conversation so far, you and the organization as a whole have really kept the athlete perspective and the athlete experience as the forefront. So can you talk a little bit more about how maybe athletes have been involved in some of these changes that have happened over the years?
Yeah, look, this is an interesting topic in its own right. And it's one that we're really passionate about here. We've been talking for a number of years now. The words are always really easy, but the operationalization of that, they actually putting that into practice can be really tricky. So the restructure we put in place, that was designed to look at it through the athletes' lens, the NSO's lens, make it easier. So we created an athlete commission 2 years ago, first time. I should say, actually, we've always had athlete representatives on our board. The board of drug orders had 2 athlete members out of 5, so 40% athletes for forever since we were created in 2006. So that's been a really positive piece. The athlete commission has been a bit of a harder thing. We put the group together, and I'd love to sit here and tell you since then athletes have been involved in everything we do. Unfortunately, it's just not as simple as that. We intend for them to be involved in everything we do, but we're just not good enough at it yet. It's a learning curve and we're halfway up the curve. And I keep going back to the Athlete Commission and saying, okay, here's a new project. We'd like your input. And they go, awesome. And then I say, and also, here's a second project we started 3 months ago, but we forgot to tell you about it. It's not that we don't want to tell them. We just don't always recognize that there's a new project starting. And actually, it would be really beneficial to have an athlete input. And it sounds silly because it's just obvious that we need an athlete input because all of our work, every dollar we spend affects an athlete directly or indirectly. So why aren't we asking them what they think? So we're on a journey. We're definitely getting better.
Absolutely. And I think it's so important that you are at least thinking about this and trying to find new ways to make sure that athletes and their voices are being represented throughout all these decision-making processes and projects that you're working on there. So one of the key things that you do there at Drug Free Sport New Zealand that we touched on briefly is education. And I think this is critical in anti-doping. So Nick, can you talk a little bit more about the educational resources that you provide through whether it's e-learning or these in-person workshops?
Yes, but actually, I might start a whole step before that, if you don't mind, which is that our workshops and the delivery of our education program is delivered by athletes. We have a full suite of athlete educators now. Some of them are current high performance athletes and the rest are former high performance athletes. None of them former by much, very recently former. So all of our education is delivered by athletes, to athletes and for athletes. And we just found the difference that made has been quite amazing. At the most extreme by way of example, when I go to talk to athletes, and particularly I have very clear recollections to talk to our slow sports athletes, some of whom were certainly younger than 20. And it's a very, very different life to the one I have. And I say I'm in my late 40s. And so when I speak, they don't listen to me. And I understand that. I've got no complaints. We're just different generations, different outlooks and different all sorts. But when we stood up in front of them, one of our educators who used to play netball for the Silver Ferns, netball is a really important sport in New Zealand. And Jody stands in front of them and says, this is who I am. And I used to play for the Silver Ferns, the New Zealand netball team. And suddenly they go, so you're also a bit older than us, but you understand what it's like to be an athlete. You understand Drug Free Sport says don't take supplements. They're risky. You understand that we may be going to do it anyway. So let's have a real conversation about that. And you also understand what it's like to be woke at 6 a.m. for a test. So let's have a real conversation about that. So we're having real conversations, and that's through our athlete educators. That's a group we're really proud of. The actual content itself, we are trying to hit many different levels of athletes. Currently, we've got online education, got workshops being delivered in person. We've got snippet information. So we've got a 15-minute anti-doping 101, a 101 15 minutes pre-Tokyo, pre-games and pre-Beijing. Give our athletes a little bit more information on the game themselves for an anti-doping. So that was with USADA and Sport Integrity Australia. So a great collaboration. On top of that, we're going to schools. We've got a youth education program designed at ages 11 to 18 and the values-based stuff by making good decisions. And we then have further information for NSOs, we've got wallet guides. There's a huge variety of stuff, but it just keeps growing. The one bit I might add to that there was going on is that what we've tried to do within here, weave into it a recognition both of the age groups that we are taught to, but also our multicultural society. So New Zealand, we've got our indigenous people, the Māori, and then we've got most of the rest of the society, European, Asian, and then a variety of others as well. But we've tried to, and we have weaved in Te Whare Tawhā, which is a Māori viewpoint of building a house based on 4 different areas. And actually, it's a much wider approach than just learning technical knowledge. It's about well-being, about spirit. We build that into our education program for everybody. And that in itself is bringing us huge rewards, but certainly we're getting greater buy-in from the widest part of society.
Absolutely. I think taking into consideration the cultural context really helps you make a stronger connection with the athletes and the people who are engaging in these education sessions.
Absolutely. That's certainly right. It goes further. It is who we are as New Zealanders. It's who we are as a country. This is our history, our shared history. And the Māori history is longer than European history, but it's our shared history now. And we're very proud of it and how we work together and how we operate together as a culture group together and values. It's really important. So that gets applied both to our education where we apply it internally with the team here. So it's just an important part of the culture of the country, the culture of drug sport and so on.
Absolutely. And you briefly mentioned or introduced this youth education initiative, and I'd love to touch on this in a little bit more detail if we can. So it's specifically targeted to young athletes. Can you tell us more about this Clean Sport Values Youth Education Program and why it was developed?
Yeah, we had a lady running our education team and then our athlete services team, Dr. Charlotte Clancy, and she did a PhD in youth attitudes to doping. Now, let's be clear, her PhD was far wider than that, and I've summarized that, but I can never remember the full technical title, so I probably undersold it. But that was my takeout. Partly generally for wider knowledge, but certainly based on her findings, we then built a youth education program. It's aimed at 11 to 18-year-olds. That was self-management, resilience, helping decision-making, key values, respect, share, play, integrity, etc. And the aim is to lay the foundations for positive sporting experiences through life. What we know from Sean's research, and it's been repeated elsewhere, I think, is that age group, 11 to 18. This is where your values and positive experiences, that's where they're created and founded for the rest of your life. If you can get it right before you're 20, you've got a decent chance of getting it right through the rest of your life. So the aim was really to get some really strong youth education into the schools where we can at that age group. We also, interestingly, at the same time, a few years back, we were doing some normal, shall we say, some traditional anti-doping education to schools. The reason being, we actually ran a testing program for 17 and 18-year-olds playing rugby. Rugby's still a national sport. And in the top grade rugby at schools level, there are some absolute stars of the game. And the quality of the rugby is so high. We, for a small number of years, ran a testing program in rugby competition finals weekend. In order to do that, we made sure all those athletes had a full education training. What we learned out of that was that it was a bit too specific for that age. Actually, there are some genuine stars of the game at school, but the majority just want to play because they're at school. And by testing them in a school environment, it wasn't right. We wanted to save that for a high performance environment if they go and join a club or franchise. And from the education side, we didn't want to only educate the first 15 rugby teams. We wanted to educate first 11 football teams, soccer teams, and the netball team and the hockey team. So we wanted to do a much wider group of people and not just the very best or the oldest, but the younger ones too. And hence the creation of the youth education program to get away from just the very narrow 17, 18-year-olds in one sport, much wider at the schools.
That's phenomenal. And you mentioned that, of course, Drug Free Sport New Zealand handles the anti-doping testing and everything under this sort of operations umbrella in terms of delivering the education as well. And then also the TUE program. So can you talk a little bit more about these sort of operations side of things?
Look, the TUE program, we're lucky, if that's the right word. We've got a TUE committee, which is chaired by Dave Gerrard, who's chair WADA's TUE expert group. Prof. Gerrard, he's been around a while. His knowledge in the TUE space is just outstanding. So we're really blessed to have him chairing our TUE committee. But the TUEs, again, like many organizations, the aim is to make sure we've got athletes cleanly. The athletes that need medication are able to take medication. The challenge is always the education for us. The challenge is always to get the athletes understanding what they can and can't take and why and how, get doctors to get medics to actually what they should be talking to the athletes about, athletes what they should be talking to their doctors about. But we're certainly getting there. We have seen challenges in the last year or two in the TUE space. And if I look at women's sport in particular, we've seen one or two instances where men's sport get a lot of personnel commitment. A lot of people around the athletes providing good advice, and women's sport were not getting as much support. And the result being that they weren't necessarily given the right information about medications in particular, which exposes them to risk. We've jumped on that, and the sports in question said actually we need to support the women as much as we support the men. There needs to be some equality in here to protect the athletes. None of us want to ban an athlete who's not a doper. That's not our aim anyway. We only want to ban the athletes that are dopers, but actually before that, much rather everybody was educated, everybody was clean, rather than ban anybody. But certainly TUE, it's just a complex field where supporting the athletes to get information to, that's the critical piece.
So let's talk about testing then next. Can you talk a little bit about maybe the volume and the scope of the testing that you do with Drug Free Sport New Zealand?
So we as we're required to do, we run a risk review every year and end up prioritizing or identifying roughly 15 sports, which we are priority sports. Now, they're important to us because that's where we'll dedicate most of our testing. And most of our testing is carried out in priority sports, and with that, high performance track athletes. That's not to say that we wouldn't occasionally test outside the high performance environment. So we did it briefly with schools, but changed that for good reason. We'll also test outside the high performance environment on the basis of specific intelligence. I would say our sports anti-doping rules, the SADR, apply to all athletes at all levels. So that's all age groups at all levels. And we just firmly believe that doping should be allowed at any level of sport. Recreational athletes included. The recreational athletes are your fans of others, future, the coaches of school teams of future outstanding athletes. So we can't change our culture. We're really proud of our strong character in sport in New Zealand. We're certainly not going to change that. So to make the testing, we're predominantly high performance, but occasionally outside of that, mainly across those 50 sports. But then equally, a chunk of tests will be put into non-priority sports, which we think are important sports, or pre-Olympic year, pre-Paralympic year, just to get a wider coverage.
Certainly, that makes sense. And in terms of the sort of investigations or understanding where the risks are, you have this platform, the Speak Out platform. Can you tell us a little bit more about how Drug Free Sport New Zealand handles some of these reports of potential doping that are coming in?
Yes, and it's interesting. We're getting more and more, and that volume just increases each year, I think. And the Speak Out platform was really launched as a way of raising concerns, a way for us to listen to concerns. If I look at some of the really high-end issues that have been raised with us, we had a young athlete being coached by someone who's facing a sanction, so she shouldn't have been coaching. We had an athlete who was heard in the changing room saying, I'm taking testosterone for different reasons. And by the way, it also is helping my sport. And he said that in the changing room. And a few of the other athletes were a bit concerned, funnily enough, and they reported that to us. So we know it's a medium that works. That's at the extreme end. There's a middle end in here where we receive regular input. People out playing sport or whatever they're doing, just saying, hey, I've got a bit of a worry about an athlete. Now, we can't act on every worry, but if we collate them in a database, which we do, and then we can look at them and say, actually, we've had 6 worries, shall we say, concerns raised about this athlete. Let's go and have a look and see. We're lucky to have, we've got a former police detective, an outstanding individual running our intelligence and investigations program. So he's really well experienced. So I like to think it's a well-managed program, which is helping us lift the game so that people can actually raise concern if they want to. The message we give to athletes is, if you're in a team sport, your priority is often your teammates, your loyalty is often to the club. But actually, we've got to think, why should you sit on the bench if one of your teammates who is cheating gets into the game? That's not fair of you. And then you look at it from the club's perspective. If and when that comes out, the club will face a big reputational damage, as well as financial one, as well as the league and points one. So that affects the club. And that, of course, then affects the members of the club, spectators, and then it affects the league. So there's a much bigger picture here. Actually, we want to hear these things and we'll take them seriously. We'll respect that intelligence. We're not going to jump at everything. The other thing, Maria, I might add is we've changed across the years about how we react to intelligence. Once upon a time, I think I got intelligence about test an athlete who want to take testosterone, go and test an athlete and see whether they come up with a positive test. Actually, there's 4 or 5 different options of how we respond to that intelligence, other than sitting there looking at it and waiting for more. You can go and test out of comp or not. You go and test the athlete in comp, so it looks more like a normal test. You could go and do some education program across the sport as a whole, do an education program for the club singularly, or contact the athlete directly and say, we'd like to educate you. Or you can go out on social media and do a social media splash across all sports, saying, this particular drug is dangerous, it is banned, don't take it. Fundamentally, I come back to our job is to get doping out of sport. It's not to catch dopers. That's a subsection. The overall aim is to get doping out of sport. If we can get 10 dopers to stop because we put a social media splash, that's a much better result catching one. That's kind of the lens we're trying to get through is we're looking to improve the whole system. How do we best do that?
Oh, very interesting. And I know, Nick, your background is in this area of fraud and corruption investigation. So this is probably a particularly interesting area for you. So can you talk us through the process that Drug Free Sport New Zealand uses for investigations of potential doping, and what happens next for athletes who might receive that dreaded notice of an adverse analytical finding, for example?
This is another significant topic, to be honest with you. Part of me goes, this is an easy question because we investigate it. We talk to people, interview some people if we need to, look at the documents, get the science results and the science manager's input from the lab, and then go from there. But the reality is actually it's a really complex issue. We know that if you're an athlete, no matter what you've done, when you get contact from us, that is life-changing potential. That is a match for mental well-being, for mental health. And then, of course, if you're in a professional sport, say, or if you make your living out of your sport, it's potentially your living being significantly compromised and your family's well-being, etc. Now, the heartless piece would say that if you're a doper, you should have known it was coming. And that's all very well, but still, we have to look out for people. And we say here, when we're dealing with an athlete, they're a person first, or a Kiwi second, they're an athlete third, potentially a doper fourth. But we have to deal with them in this order so that we actually look after people. We've had a couple of cases in the last 18 months where we've put, in collaboration with the NSO, we've put significant wellbeing support around athletes to make sure that they get through the process okay. So there's a big piece with the NSO in looking at the athletes. We also recognize that whilst I'll tell you our budget is, I'd always do more with more money, put it that way. But I recognize that we as a big organization actually budget for taking action against athletes where there's been wrongdoing. Athletes don't. They're often the power difference significant. And so we set up a legal fund for athletes whereby anybody who receives an letter from us saying, I think there's a potential ADRB here, they claim up to $2,000 spend with a lawyer, largely on their choice. It's got to come from a specific website's accredited list, shall we say, but that's not our accredited list. And we don't question how the money's used as long as we get a legitimate voice from the lawyer, we'll pay. We want athletes, the people who are innocent, people who have made an innocent mistake or the dopes, we want all of them to get good advice because we think that it's only fair for them if they've got some funding to do so. But also selfishly, we know that if an athlete gets good advice, they're innocent, they should fight it. If they get good advice and they're a doper, they should confess it. And there's a much better chance of their lawyer giving that advice. So it's better for the system. So they're the two things we've put in place really to look after the athletes. After that, we'll work through the system as best we can. In New Zealand, we have our sport tribunal that hears all of our cases. Every single case goes before the sports tribunal. They make the decision whether an ADRB is established and they make the decision to sanction. And again, I think it's a really robust process that we have, a really robust setup. It means that Drug Free Sport, as the agency responsible for regulation, education, all the way through to investigation, the decision making of an ADRB is taken out of our hands, given to a really well-experienced, well-established tribunal for them to make the decision. So that, again, I just think it's a robust system.
Definitely. And perhaps you've mentioned a few of these throughout our conversation, but what are some of the things that you think, Nick, really make Drug Free Sport New Zealand unique, perhaps compared to other sport or anti-doping organizations?
Oh, look, this is the unashamed bias. And I say as an immigrant to New Zealand 20 years ago, and I've definitely gone native in that time. It's our people. But others might say that, but our people, we've got such a good team of people who are really engaging at our sports, who really want to work together. And it's just a good, fun place to be. And the other thing, just interesting, I was reflecting on this morning as I was coming into work. We're small enough here. We're 25 people. We're small enough to make change and want to make change. And we're big enough to be able to do it. And so we're agile. And we're doing that at the moment. We're completely changing our computer systems. We're small enough just to go make sure we get it done. We're big enough to actually have funding that people around us to make it work and be successful. We're halfway through that process. In a year's time, I think we'll have an entirely new computer system end to end, which takes you through education, things again, all the different TUEs, I&I, lots of management. Hopefully it'll feed into Adams, which is still a wee bit of an API to be sorted out by WADA, but that'll come one day. But really, that's the thing. It's our agility in our people.
Well, it sounds like you've got a nice balance there to really help you maximize the sort of size and efficiency. I think that's awesome. And we talked in the earlier part of our conversation about some of these partnerships. And I think these partnerships are so important in anti-doping. And I know Drug Free Sport New Zealand and all the other anti-doping organizations around the world can't do it alone because sport is definitely international. So how does Drug Free Sport New Zealand work with partner organizations, whether it's the Partnership for Clean Competition or WADA or NADOs or just other stakeholders in clean sport?
Well, I always say anti-doping is a team sport. It just is. If I look at Drug Free Sport New Zealand, we are funded by the New Zealand government to look after potentially New Zealand athletes. But I'm certainly of the view, in order to look after and protect New Zealand athletes, I'd like all British athletes to be clean, and I'd like all Chinese athletes to be clean, and I'd like all American and Canadian athletes to be clean. Because if they're all clean, our athletes here get against clean athletes. So there's real value in us. In fact, it's mandatory that we work together with other agencies. It's really important for us that we share anything we have, frankly, any innovations we have here or any ideas we have here, we'll give away as much as we can, even if we've invested money in it, because it's to the benefit of Kiwi athletes if we do that. So we really enjoy our partnerships. So we've had some really successful ones, as I've said before, just the little ones, the pre-Tokyo, pre-Beijing, anti-doping 101, pre-games 101, 15-minute education snippets. We sat down in a room with USADA, Sport Integrity Australia, and bang that out in a relatively short period of time. And that collaboration sent a really good output, which all three agencies, all three countries athletes benefit. So that's the critical piece. It's a team sport. The second bit is, we're at the bottom of the South Pacific. We live in paradise, I'll be clear, but we're a long way from anywhere else. And that is the price of living in paradise. This is a Kiwi trait. We're really happy to get our hands dirty, do stuff. We've come from a long history of a very strong farming sector, and it's something has to change, go and make it happen. And so when we get involved in the international stage, you always find Kiwis and Aussies, to be fair, in committee, contributing to the meeting and just want to help make things better and good. So that's the critical piece of working with organizations, other organizations.
Definitely. And I think it's so important to be part of that sort of boots on the ground force, making change happen in sport and anti-doping. And you mentioned, of course, sharing innovations and ideas is key. So how is Drug Free Sport New Zealand really incorporating some of the new innovations in anti-doping or maybe findings from anti-doping research to continue enhancing and developing your anti-doping programs and the processes and the resources that you provide?
Well, I look at the ears to the ground and always listening to see what's out there and what's changing, and whether that be dried blood spot testing through to some of the education things that are going on. We've certainly done a few things ourselves last year that you may have seen. We've had 2 videos coming through on social media designed entirely for the domestic audience, one around a slightly fun take on the 11 ADRVs to explain them to athletes, and the other one being a really critical message for us domestically of the rules apply to everyone. It doesn't matter if you're on the podium or just a recreational athlete or somewhere in between. Actually, the rules apply to everyone. It's safe, fun, fair sport is better. And these videos, we produced them, we stuck them out on social media and elsewhere. And we've had various requests from various people saying, are they able to use them as well? And that's at the extent we're able to. The answer is always yes. In terms of other people's innovation, we're really keen to be part of it. Take DBS as an example. We were slightly on the sidelines of when the initial discussion with the development of that. And that's, again, partly location, but also it's partly size. We're just a bit on the small side. But as soon as DBS was launched and available, we were very quick to get that into the field. So we've had a DBS program running. It started earlier this year, and we're just keen to grab it and go. If you can make the athlete experience better, and DBS does that, then let's give it a crack, see if we can make it work.
Absolutely. And does Drug Free Sport conduct or maybe fund any anti-doping research on their own?
We don't directly. Now, we've talked about it. Well, that's not quite true. I'd say Sian did her PhD, and that started in 2017, where we funded her directly to do that because we've got the education space. That's the area where we could have the most impact. That was a 3-year one. We haven't done any since, but certainly looking at it, and what's certainly got academics reaching out to us to partner with us on their research and their applications through to the social sciences research grant from WADA, etc. So not directly is the answer.
Gotcha. That makes sense. And, we touched on all the amazing things that you're doing there at Drug Free Sport New Zealand. And I know there are always challenges in sport. It's an evolving landscape. There's a lot happening and a lot changing over time. So what are some of the biggest challenges, Nick, that Drug Free Sport New Zealand is currently facing? And how are you working to address these problems with your team?
The current challenge is it's probably a function of the growth I've described from 8 or 9 people to 25. We've gone through a number of years of change, and now we're just trying to catch our breath and to make sure that our sample collection manual is right up to date, to make sure our DCOs and chaperones in the field are properly accredited, trained, reaccredited. We've introduced a quality team, kind of external audit team, doing field team evaluations to make sure that we're as good as we'd like to think. So all these ideas have come in. We've put all the changes in structure. We're putting things in place. This is the year where we just stop, pause, and take a breath and make sure it's all documented as we need to be documented, that we know we're fully compliant. Say that quickly, but to make sure we're fully compliant in the way that we want to be with the code. And so that's kind of the challenge facing us in a big way this year. It's just to make sure everything is absolutely stable, ready for next. As we've said, next is the change to the Sport Regulation Commission. And that's coming rapidly now. And just got to be ready for a wider mandate and wider roles, because anti-doping cannot stop. So that will continue. That's the absolute continuity, is the anti-doping work. And the people here who are doing it now carry on doing it just the same way. So there's a message for athletes and sports. You won't see any difference in terms of anti-doping, but it's big change. And that any change is always a nervous time for people and potentially a bit of a challenge.
Certainly. And thinking about the future then, Nick, I know you mentioned there's going to be some changes on the horizon, but what are some of the key focus areas that you and the team at Drug Free Sport New Zealand, or just the anti-doping community in New Zealand in general, are really thinking about and focusing on?
The integrity piece is a big piece, of course, from an anti-doping perspective. And again, it's the same sort of theme. I'm honest, it's the bedding in, it's getting the athlete commission really functioning well. And that's partly them, but mainly that's us. We're working out to integrate it properly and get them involved as much as we'd like to get them involved. And that's kind of the focus area now, is to expand what we're already doing and really make it successful. And that would be the feedback I'd like from athletes, a year from now or 2 years from now would be, God, we now know that when we raise an issue, it gets addressed. Either there's a change or you explain why there's not a change. We know that when launching a product or a new innovation, athletes have been involved in its creation. So we know it's properly fit for purpose. And so that would be a really good feedback. We've recently done a project or supported another student, PhD student, Nick Holland, who created a free podium sample collection vessel, which he did on the back of an experience. A friend of his had a female selected for testing, and she provided samples, as I understand it. Those sample collection kits we use now are typically easier for males to use than females to use. And so he went out of his way to design, as part of his design university course, new kit, which is far easier for females. And so that's the kind of thing we're trying to support as well. And that might be part of our move to a genuine athlete-centered approach. It's a continuum, it's a journey. We're part of the way down it, but I suspect there's a lot more to go.
Absolutely. Well, it sounds like there's a lot to look forward to. And we mentioned in our introduction that not only do you work with Drug Free Sport New Zealand, but you also work as governing board chair for the Institute of Anti-Doping Organizations, or iNADO. Many of our listeners may be familiar with the organization. So can you tell us more about your role there and just the important impacts that iNADO has on the anti-doping community as a whole?
Yeah, look, iNADO's been around a while, and I kind of describe it as an industry that brings us all together. I've been chair of that for a couple of years. We got the board together 2 years ago to reset strategy, and nothing dramatically changed, but we started using slightly different words. Now, when we look at iNADO, the way we describe ourselves, our purpose, we say iNADO is thousands of experts working together so that every NADO or RADO can move towards excellence, supporting athletes in sport. And what that's saying is that iNADO itself is an organization that brings together members. It matches members up, because at the fingertips of iNADO, there are so many experts at each national anti-doping organization or regional anti-doping organization. Now, some have more than others. Some know that. There's mature NADOs, less mature NADOs. Actually, there's experts in all regions in their own space. iNADO's job is to bring those together so that if I've got an issue here in New Zealand, I can, through iNADO, get in contact with somebody who's got an answer to the question. And the simplest example of this for iNADO, and this would be to recommend to any listener in the space, the biggest benefit for me of iNADO, and there are many, biggest benefit is the Basecamp system. So Basecamp, it's a dialogue system, it's a bulletin board system. I can go on there. I know my testing manager went on there a month or two back and said, we're looking to change the kit that our doping control officers wear in the field, polo shirts that our doping control officers wear in the fields. So this is a deeply, deeply operational question. It goes on there. He's got some genuine queries. He says, right, we're thinking about this. Do we need to have a big logo or a small logo? Who tries to hide in the background in the field and who shouts from the rooftops that we are doping control so that everybody knows that doping control is in the arena? Because there's benefits and there's pros and cons to each of those. He says, do you wear a black top or do you wear a bright yellow top? What's your approach? Because there's only one national anti-doping organization in each country, by definition, we've got no peers domestically to have this conversation with. So he throws this question at Basecamp. Within 24 hours, he's got 7 different answers from, I think it's from 2, maybe 3 different regions of people with different cultures, different languages, thankfully it's all in English, who give ideas from their own jurisdiction. And suddenly we have this enormous amount of information to make a really good decision on, some of which we knew, but a whole bunch of it we hadn't even considered because we didn't know. So that's the benefit of iNADO. It brings people together. Our aim is to get every NADO improving. So if you're a big NADO, a big mature NADO, there's still room to improve. So what can iNADO do to assist you in doing that? And if you're a small NADO or a NADO member, can we connect you up with a bigger one and actually provide a whole bunch of that support? I would say that approach really does require working very closely with the NADO-RADO relations team at WADA in particular to make sure we're not standing on each other's toes, etc. But that's being done successfully, I think. But it's really a case of support for all.
Certainly. And I think that example you provided perfectly illustrated that there's just so much value to being able to tap into the perspectives and experiences of NADOs all over the world. People who may have had the same questions as you did, maybe tried a couple of things. So you don't have to sort of walk the same ground, make the same mistakes that they did. You can just jump right to a solution that will likely work for your organization. I think that's phenomenal.
And look, that's a deeply operational. What did I say? You can go the next level up. And certainly your question asked is, why is cannabis on the list? Why has it been banned? That is a topic which has gone back and forth for a very long time, but current opinions are really important. So that's had input. You then list it up if you want to the UNESCO WADA funding formula. What's the NADO's opinion on government? And suddenly you have these very different conversations again, but all of them useful if you have a need for that sort of information.
I think that is absolutely remarkable. And we appreciate you sharing so much information and your perspectives with us today, Nick. If our listeners would like to learn more about you or more about Drug-Free Sport New Zealand, what is the best way for them to do so?
Look, we've got a website, drugfreesport, all one word, .org.nz, and of course a bunch of social media channels. So we pop up there, and I'd really encourage anyone, particularly social media, to get involved. I'm not an avid social media user, I'll be honest, but when I do pop in there, the team are just doing a great job. Just really interesting, fun things popping up and informative things. So we welcome anybody getting involved there and feedback along the way. In terms of iNADO, I would wish everyone to the iNADO website, iNADO.org, but equally you're very welcome to reach out to me or to the Chief Executive Jorge Leyva directly if anybody wants more information on iNADO in particular. And of course at the WADA Symposium in Rosac, be there, very happy to talk to people one-on-one, face-to-face, which forever will be my preferred approach.
I love it. Well, Nick, thank you so much for sharing those resources. Listeners, definitely check out those websites. Get in touch if you have questions. And it's been wonderful to have you on the show today, Nick. We really appreciate your time.
An absolute pleasure and really delighted to talk to you today.
Well, it's been great to have you here. And listeners, as always, great to have you here with us as well. If you haven't already, it would mean so much to us if you could take a moment to rate our podcast or leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. And listeners, please note that the Anti-Doping Podcast features a wide variety of clean sport experts, and episodes may include statements and or viewpoints that do not necessarily reflect the views or values of the PCC. Thank you, and we look forward to seeing you on the next episode of the Anti-Doping Podcast.